Let's get a word from James Dowling, who's a founding partner of Negotiant, a consultancy specialising in private-public negotiations. James, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
You've been a former advisor in various government departments. You know how these things work. I said at the beginning, I'm a bit of a sucker for a leader's speech. Even that Polanski bloke from the Green Party had me for 3 seconds. That's how much of a sucker I am. She gave a good speech. Was it good enough?
I fear that although I think Kemi Badenoch could turn this around with the country if she were given the time to do it. I fear, to your point, that the party, despite a good speech and despite a well-delivered speech with kind of traditional Tory notes in, will not be given the time by the party. So, I mean, I think in particular, the problem is that they will ultimately tire of tanking poll ratings and near invisibility in the media. And after the May elections, she's clearly very vulnerable, and inconspicuously failed to rule out resigning if they had a bad result.
That is the problem, isn't it? Is that it will rest on that, and as you know better than most, sort of perception becomes reality in politics. So even if she's given great speeches, hasn't done anything differently, if there's a perception that things are weakening, and then it's backed up by the continuation of bad polling, it's going to be curtains, isn't it? And in many respects, I mean, that's almost worse for some, changing the leader, than sticking with this one, because that provides even more uncertainty.
And it's particle. I mean, what do we have? Six, seven by then leaders in as many years. I mean, it makes what was once seen as the natural party of government look like a joke. And I think the risk is that the kind of, if you're watching the hall, if you're in the hall, you're watching her speech, and you and I both, I listened to her speech, you watched her speech, you will think it was a good speech. You will think the kind of the messages she gave were good ones. But this may shock you. Most people don't don't watch the speech of a leader of the opposition, particularly one as unpopular as she is, as they are, and the average voter is going to hear the messages they will hear from Tory conference are about leaving the ECHR, sacking judges, and abolishing stamp duty. Now, that is arguably the same populist playbook that got them into this hole in the first place. And if you're interested in that, you're probably already voting for reform. So until she tangibly tacks back to the more traditional Tory notes of kind of sound public finances, flinty pragmatism, the centre-right ground that the Tories used to get their election victories from.
Does that terrain exist anymore, though, James? I was listening to Michael Heseltine yesterday, who's what you would call a liberal conservative, much like yourself. He listens to some of this stuff and thinks this is outrageous. He made the point, you don't get the centre ground this way. Yes, there's a lot of loud voices that have these views on whether it's immigration, welfare, whatever, but you've got to capture the centre ground, and if you don't capture the centre ground, you're stuffed. I wonder if that is still true. Has the centre ground shifted, or is Heseltine right?
I think there is a market in the country at large for sound grown-up government. I mean, I think particularly when you look at the electoral landscape, you've got the right herring off in a populist direction, offering messages that argue of a frankly even more extreme variety than got Conservatives into the mess they were in when they were last in government. You've also got a Labour government that, if you put it nicely, isn't doing very well. And the Liberal Democrats are arguably of the left as well. I think there is a kind of there is an untapped, unsatisfied market for a kind of sensible centre-right government of a more traditional Tory, liberal Tory.
But that's quite nuanced, though, isn't it? You've got reform there. I mean, many would look at this whole picture, James, and say the only way this is going to end sort of well for the Conservatives will ultimately be a pact with reform.
Well, and I don't see what's in it for reform. I can see on one hand...
Well, forming a government might be the answer to that, of course.
Well, maybe, except that I think more likely what's going to happen to the Tory vote is you're either going to vote reform, or you're just going to stay at home. I think the Tories are facing an apocalyptic situation, and therefore you can see why they might see it as in their interests. I think kind of for reform, you can probably see as much downside as upside, and I think the alternative prescription is one where you offer a kind of more. You are willing to talk reality to the voters, not indulge in some of the promises that both left and right parties are otherwise offering, and actually kind of set out looking like a sensible party again. And in aggregate, I'm not sure that this conference did that.
Yeah, I think you might be right on that point, James. Thank you, sir, for your time. James Dowling, former advisor, ex-Treasury, ex-Ministry of Justice, ex-DWP. He's been all over the place.